The night Grant Whitmore placed his wife's coat around another woman's shoulders, he did not know he was handing Aaliyah Brooks the key to her own freedom. Snow had been falling over Manhattan since sunset, soft and silver against the glass walls of the Belmont Hotel, where every chandelier seemed to burn brighter for people who had never been asked to prove they belonged. Aaliyah stood beside her husband beneath that expensive light, elegant in a black velvet gown, her deep brown skin glowing with the quiet grace that had made photographers turn their cameras toward her long before they learned her last name. Whitmore. That name followed her everywhere now, printed on charity invitations, whispered by society wives, placed beside Grant's like a decorative ribbon tied around his empire. But before she was Mrs. Whitmore, she had been Aaliyah Brooks from Atlanta, the daughter of a school librarian who taught her that dignity was not something the world gave you. It was something you refused to surrender. On that winter night, she wore her mother's white cashmere coat, the last gift Eleanor Brooks had bought her before illness took her voice and then her breath. The coat was simple, soft, and old enough to carry memory in its seams. Aaliyah had worn it only for important nights, and Grant knew that. He knew everything it meant. He had once touched the sleeve and promised, with young tears in his eyes, that he would protect anything her mother had loved. Yet across the ballroom, Celeste Marlowe shivered with perfect timing. She stood near the marble staircase in a silver dress, pale shoulders lifted delicately, lips curved in the kind of helpless smile that asked for attention without ever speaking the words. Grant noticed. Of course he noticed. Aaliyah felt the shift before he moved. The small betrayal that begins not with a kiss, not with a secret message, but with a man forgetting who is standing beside him. Grant slipped his hand from Aaliyah's waist and reached for the coat resting over her chair. For one heartbeat she thought he was bringing it to her. Then he crossed the polished floor, past donors and senators and women with diamonds at their throats, and placed it gently around Celeste's shoulders. The room did not gasp. Rooms like that never gasp. They watched. They calculated. They smiled behind champagne glasses. Celeste lowered her lashes, sliding her fingers over the white cashmere as if she had earned its warmth. Grant leaned close, saying something Aaliyah could not hear, but she did not need the words. His posture said enough. His tenderness said enough. The silence said everything. Aaliyah looked at the coat, then at the ring on her left hand, then at the gold letters on the gala screen reading Whitmore Foundation. For years she had allowed that name to stand in front of hers. That ended tonight. 5 years earlier, no one in that ballroom would have recognized Grant Whitmore without Aaliyah Brooks beside him. Back then, Whitmore Capital was not an empire. It was 3 rented rooms above a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, a cracked conference table, 2 exhausted interns, and a 32-year-old man with an expensive education and a company bleeding money faster than he could pretend to control it. Grant still wore tailored suits, but the cuffs were fraying. He still spoke like a man destined for power, but banks had stopped returning his calls, investors had stopped smiling, and his father's old friends had begun using that careful tone reserved for failure. Aaliyah met him on a rainy Thursday at a small business forum in Atlanta, where she had been invited to speak about ethical investment models for underfunded communities. She was not the loudest person in the room. She did not need to be. Her presence had weight. Her voice was calm, her numbers precise, her questions sharper than the polished cuff links around the table. Grant listened from the back row as she explained how a company could grow without feeding on desperation, how loyalty could be measured not only in profit, but in the lives a business refused to break. Afterward, he followed her into the hallway with the confidence of a man used to being welcomed, but Aaliyah did not melt beneath it. She looked at his proposal, turned 3 pages, and found the weakness he had hidden from everyone else. "You are not short on ambition, Mr. Whitmore," she told him. "You are short on truth." He should have been offended. Instead, he laughed for the first time in months. That night, over black coffee and spreadsheets spread across a diner booth, she rebuilt his company on napkins while the rain ran down the window beside them. She saw the missing structure, the false projections, the investors who wanted his name but not his survival. She taught him how to slow down, how to listen, how to stop confusing pride with leadership. Within 6 months, Whitmore Capital had stabilized. Within a year, it was attracting serious money. Within 2, Grant was being photographed for magazines that never once asked who had designed the strategy behind his rise. Aaliyah did not ask for applause then. She believed love did not keep score. When Grant proposed beneath the oak trees outside her mother's house, he promised her that Brooks would never disappear inside Whitmore. He said her name like it mattered. He held Eleanor Brooks's hand and promised to honor the daughter she had raised. And Aaliyah believed him, because some betrayals do not arrive wearing perfume and silk. Some arrive years earlier, dressed as a promise. The first year of marriage looked flawless from the outside. The magazines called them a modern power couple, the self-made billionaire and the brilliant woman who had softened his edges. Their wedding had been held at a private estate in the Hudson Valley, beneath white roses, gold lanterns, and a sky so clear that Aaliyah had taken it as a blessing. She walked down the aisle as Aaliyah Brooks, her mother's pearls resting at her throat, her father's old handkerchief folded around her bouquet, her heart steady with the belief that love could expand a woman, not erase her. But after the honeymoon, expansion became adjustment. Adjustment became silence. Silence became the costume everyone praised. At first, the changes were small enough to sound reasonable. Grant's publicist suggested she use Whitmore professionally, because it looked more unified on foundation documents. His board preferred that she attend investor dinners instead of running independent consulting projects, because her presence helped calm nervous shareholders. His mother, Patricia Whitmore, smiled across Sunday brunch and told her that old family names carried certain expectations in New York society. Aaliyah understood expectation. She had carried it her entire life. What she did not understand, not then, was how expectation could become a velvet rope around the throat. Her calendar filled with luncheons, galas, ribbon cuttings, and charity boards where her ideas were welcomed only after someone else repeated them in a softer voice. Her proposal for a women's independence fund was called inspiring, then postponed, then quietly folded into the Whitmore Foundation under Grant's signature. When she asked about it, he kissed her forehead in the kitchen of their Fifth Avenue penthouse and said, "We are building one legacy now, Aaliyah. Ours." The word ours sounded beautiful until she realized it mostly meant his. Slowly, Brooks disappeared. It vanished from her business cards, then from interviews, then from the introductions of men who shook Grant's hand first and asked Aaliyah what designer she was wearing before asking what she had built. She learned to smile without showing disappointment. She learned to stand beside Grant while cameras flashed and strangers praised his instincts. She learned that in certain rooms, a black woman could be admired for her elegance while being quietly punished for her authority. Grant did not see it, or perhaps he saw it and found it convenient. Every time she tried to step forward, he asked her to be patient. Every time she spoke too plainly, he asked her to be strategic. Every time she missed the sound of her own name, he reminded her how many women would envy her life. So Aaliyah became Mrs. Whitmore in public, polished, gracious, perfectly lit. But at night, when the penthouse went quiet and the city blinked beneath the windows, she would open an old folder labeled Brooks and remember the woman she had promised never to abandon. Celeste Marlowe entered Whitmore Capital on a Tuesday morning wearing winter white and the confidence of someone who had studied every room before stepping into it. She arrived as a brand strategist, hired to refine the company's public image before its largest charity season yet. But Aaliyah understood within 10 minutes that Celeste was not there to polish a logo. She was there to study a throne. Celeste had pale blonde hair, a careful laugh, and the talent of making every compliment sound like a measurement. At their first meeting, she praised Aaliyah's dress, then asked whether it was difficult to choose colors that photographed well under strong lighting. The boardroom went quiet for half a breath. Grant missed it, or chose to. He was standing near the windows, pleased by Celeste's presentation, nodding as she spoke about legacy, optics, influence, and emotional access. All the words Aaliyah had used years earlier, now wrapped in a voice that made powerful men feel original for hearing them. Celeste knew when to lean in, when to pause, when to let her gaze linger on Grant just long enough to seem admiring and not enough to seem obvious. She learned the rhythm of his ego with frightening speed. By the second week, she was attending meetings that had nothing to do with branding. By the fourth, her name appeared on weekend strategy notes. By the sixth, Grant was saying things like Celeste understands the public temperature, as though Aaliyah had not spent years saving him from storms he never saw coming. The changes were subtle, then insulting. Celeste began sitting in Aaliyah's usual chair at conference lunches, claiming she did not realize it was taken. She sent revised gala speeches that removed Aaliyah's name from foundation history and replaced it with phrases like the Whitmore family vision. She laughed too brightly at Patricia Whitmore's cold jokes and called Grant brilliant in a tone that made him stand taller. Once, at the penthouse, Aaliyah found Celeste standing in the entry hall beneath Eleanor Brooks's framed photograph, studying it as if deciding whether memory could be rearranged like furniture. "Beautiful coat," Celeste said, glancing at the white cashmere hanging beside the door. "Vintage?" Aaliyah looked at her reflection in the black marble wall before answering. "My mother gave it to me." Celeste smiled softly, but her eyes remained sharp. How meaningful. Some things are hard to let go of. That was the moment Aaliyah knew. Celeste did not only want Grant. She wanted proof that Aaliyah could be replaced piece by piece, chair by chair, sentence by sentence, until even the sacred things looked borrowed. And Grant, blinded by admiration he had mistaken for respect, kept opening doors for her. For Aaliyah, the white cashmere coat had never belonged to fashion. It belonged to memory. Eleanor Brooks had bought it on a cold December afternoon in Atlanta, 3 weeks before the doctors began speaking in careful voices and 6 months before silence settled permanently in the chair where her mother used to read. They had found the coat in a small boutique near Peachtree Street, folded beneath a sign that said final sale. It cost more than either of them should have spent, and Aaliyah had tried to put it back twice, laughing softly about rent, groceries, and common sense. But Eleanor had touched the sleeve with the reverence of a woman choosing armor for her daughter. Every woman needs one beautiful thing that reminds her she was loved before the world tried to measure her, she had said. Then she bought it anyway, handing over her debit card with a trembling smile and the kind of dignity poverty never managed to steal from her. Years later, after the funeral, Aaliyah wore the coat for the first time to a bank meeting where Grant was about to lose everything. She remembered standing in the elevator beside him, his face pale beneath the harsh light, his confidence cracked in ways only she could see. Before the doors opened, he touched the coat and asked if it made her feel brave. "No," she told him. "It reminds me I come from brave women." He had looked at her then as if she were the only solid thing left in his life. That morning, she spoke for him when his voice tightened. She explained risk models, restructured repayment terms, and saved the company from collapse with a calm so complete that 3 bankers stopped looking at Grant and started listening to her. Afterward, on the sidewalk, he took both her hands and promised that if he ever built anything worth protecting, her name would be written into its foundation. That promise returned to her now in the Belmont Ballroom as Celeste's fingers slid over Eleanor's coat. The fabric rested on another woman's shoulders, but the insult landed somewhere deeper than cloth. Grant had not taken a spare wrap from the coat check. He had not called for a driver, had not asked a server, had not offered his own tuxedo jacket. He had reached for the one thing in the room that carried Aaliyah's mother, her childhood, her grief, her survival. Then he had handed it away as if meaning could be borrowed without consequence. Across the marble floor, Celeste glanced at Aaliyah and smiled. It was small, almost invisible, but sharp enough to clarify everything. Aaliyah understood then that betrayal was not always hidden in hotel rooms or secret messages. Sometimes it stood beneath chandeliers, wrapped in your mother's last gift, waiting to see whether you would still remain polite. Aaliyah crossed the ballroom slowly, not because she lacked urgency, but because she refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her hurry away from her own humiliation. The violins continued their polished song near the terrace doors, champagne continued to sparkle in crystal flutes, and the city beyond the glass kept glowing as though nothing sacred had been mishandled beneath those chandeliers. Grant noticed her only when she was already close. His smile faltered, a small crack in the flawless mask he wore for donors, senators, and people whose approval he valued more than truth. "Aaliyah," he began, lowering his voice into that private tone he used when he wanted to manage a problem instead of face a wound. Celeste looked between them, one delicate hand still resting on the white cashmere, her expression arranged into innocence so perfect it nearly became comedy. Aaliyah did not look at her first. She looked at Grant. She wanted to find one trace of the man who had once stood in the rain outside a diner and promised that her name would live in everything he built. She searched his eyes for shame, for memory, for the smallest recognition that he had taken something from her that no apology could clean. But Grant only looked uncomfortable. Not sorry. Uncomfortable. That was when the last thread broke. Aaliyah reached for her left hand and removed her wedding ring with the same calm precision, she once used to sign contracts that saved his company. The diamond caught the chandelier light as it slid free, bright and cold, a star that had lost its sky. Around them, conversations thinned into whispers. Someone set down a glass. Someone else pretended not to stare. Grant's face tightened. "What are you doing?" he asked. Aaliyah placed the ring on the rim of his champagne glass, where it balanced for one breath before dropping softly inside, sinking through the bubbles like a truth finally allowed to fall. Then she looked at Celeste, at the coat, at the borrowed warmth wrapped around borrowed importance. "If she needs my coat to feel valuable," Aaliyah said, her voice quiet enough to make the room lean closer, "maybe she can keep your last name too." The silence that followed was not empty. It was alive. Grant's mouth opened, but no command came out. Celeste's smile faded by degrees. Patricia Whitmore, standing near the floral arch, went pale beneath her pearls. Aaliyah turned before anyone could recover, before Grant could reach for her image, her obedience, or the years he had mistaken for ownership. She walked past the cameras, past the donors, past the gold letters that had erased her name for the last time. At the coat check, the attendant asked if she needed assistance. Aaliyah only shook her head. Outside, Manhattan winter met her bare shoulders with a clean, honest cold. She stepped into the falling snow without the coat, without the ring, without the name Whitmore, and for the first time in years, the air belonged to her. The cold did not punish Aaliyah the way the ballroom had. It was honest. It touched her bare shoulders without pretending to be kindness, slipped beneath the velvet of her gown without smiling behind champagne, and filled her lungs with something sharp enough to feel like truth. Snow gathered in her hair as she stepped away from the Belmont Hotel, each flake melting against her skin like a quiet witness. Behind her, through the revolving glass doors, the gala continued its careful performance. Music, laughter, wealth pretending it had not just watched a woman reclaim herself in real time. A valet rushed forward with concern in his eyes and asked if he should call her car. Aaliyah almost said yes out of habit, because Mrs. Whitmore always had a driver waiting at the curb, always had a schedule arranged by someone else, always moved through the city inside tinted glass. But Aaliyah Brooks had once taken buses through Atlanta with 2 notebooks in her bag and exact change in her palm. She had walked home from late shifts beneath streetlights that flickered like tired stars. She remembered how to move without permission. "No thank you," she said. "I will walk." The valet hesitated, looking at the snow, the gown, the diamond earrings still catching light near her jaw. But something in her face stopped him from offering again. She turned north along Fifth Avenue, past storefronts glowing with holiday displays, past couples tucked into wool coats, past tourists lifting phones toward the white sky. No one knew who she was. For once, that felt merciful. Her phone began vibrating inside her small black clutch before she reached the corner. Grant. Patricia. Grant again. A board member. A public relations director. Each name appeared like a hand reaching from the life she had just left behind. She turned the screen dark. The silence afterward felt wider than the avenue. At 57th Street, she stopped beneath a canopy and looked at her reflection in a closed boutique window. The woman staring back looked expensive, composed, and nearly frozen but not broken. Never broken. Her shoulders were bare, yes. Her coat was gone. Her ring was gone. The last name that had covered her like polished glass was already loosening from her skin. A yellow cab slowed beside the curb, but she kept walking. 10 blocks became 15. Her feet ached inside satin heels, and the city blurred softly through falling snow. Yet with every step the humiliation lost weight. By the time she reached the small all-night diner near Columbus Circle, her breath had steadied. She ordered black coffee, wrapped both hands around the warm mug, and opened her phone only once. Not to call Grant. Not to answer anyone. She searched for the legal steps to restore a maiden name in the state of New York. Then, with snow melting on her gown and Eleanor Brooks's courage alive in her chest, Aaliyah whispered the name she had been missing for years. Brooks. By sunrise, Aaliyah had stopped shaking. Not because the pain had passed, but because purpose had entered the room and taken a seat beside it. She left the diner just as Manhattan softened from black glass into pale morning, her gown hidden beneath a borrowed gray sweatshirt the waitress had insisted she take, her heels tucked in a paper bag, her bare feet in drugstore flats bought from a 24-hour pharmacy on the corner. It was not glamorous. It was not tragic. It was real, and real felt better than polished. At 8:30, she stood inside a quiet family law office overlooking Bryant Park, her hair still carrying the faint memory of snow, her voice steady as she told the attorney what she wanted. Not revenge. Not drama. Accuracy. Her legal name restored to Aaliyah Brooks. Her financial rights reviewed without apology. Her contributions documented without being softened for Grant's comfort. The attorney, Denise Caldwell, was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 60s who had seen too many wealthy husbands mistake silence for surrender. She listened without interrupting, then slid a yellow legal pad across the desk and asked one question. What did you build before they asked you to disappear? Aaliyah looked at the blank page for a long moment. Then she began to write. Investment models. Early debt restructuring. Donor relationships. Foundation strategy. Minority business portfolio design. Community lending framework. Emergency capital plan. The list grew longer than she expected. Each line a small door opening inside a house she had forgotten belonged to her. By noon, Grant's legal team had called 3 times. By 2, a settlement proposal arrived, elegant, generous, and insulting in the way wealthy men often used money as a broom. A private residence in Connecticut. A lifetime allowance. A non-disclosure agreement so thick it seemed designed to bury her name all over again. Denise read it, smiled without warmth, and asked if Aaliyah wanted comfort or ownership. Aaliyah did not hesitate. Ownership. That evening, from a modest hotel room on the Upper West Side, Aaliyah sent Grant her answer through counsel. She would not accept an allowance. She would not accept a quiet retirement wrapped in luxury. She would not sign away the truth of her own labor. She requested the equity Grant had placed under holding structures during the first years of Whitmore Capital, shares created from strategies she designed, relationships she secured, and value she helped build before the world called him a genius. Grant called her personal phone minutes later. She watched his name glow on the screen until it faded. Then she opened a new document on her laptop and typed the heading carefully, as if carving it into stone. Aaliyah Brooks, founder. Grant had always believed the past was safe because he had stored it in places no one thought to open. Old servers. Archived email chains. Boxes marked inactive records in a climate-controlled storage unit in Long Island City. But Aaliyah had built too much of his empire to forget where the bones were buried. 3 days after she filed to restore her name, Denise Caldwell sent a formal preservation notice to Whitmore Capital, and suddenly the polished machine began to tremble. Documents arrived slowly at first, then in waves. Aaliyah sat in Denise's conference room beneath fluorescent lights with a legal assistant named Maya, sorting through printed reports, meeting notes, investor decks, foundation memos, and financial models that looked painfully familiar. Her language was everywhere. Not copied carelessly, not enough for a stranger to notice, but enough for a woman to recognize her own mind wearing another person's signature. A community investment framework she had drafted at 2 in the morning appeared in a board presentation credited to Grant. A debt restructuring plan she had created during the Chicago crisis became part of his keynote speech at a business summit in Dallas. Her proposal for a women's independence fund had been renamed the Whitmore Social Impact Initiative, with Celeste listed as brand architect in the updated press materials. Aaliyah read that line twice, then set the page down with surgical calm. Maya looked at her carefully, expecting tears, perhaps anger, perhaps the kind of collapse people imagine when a woman finally sees the full size of what was taken from her. Aaliyah only reached for another folder. Pain could wait. Evidence had a deadline. By evening, the conference table had become a map of erasure. Blue tabs marked her original emails. Yellow tabs marked Grant's public claims. Green tabs marked financial benefit. Red tabs marked moments when her name had been removed. The red tabs multiplied until they looked like small flames across the paper. Denise stood at the window, reading a contract from the early years, and finally looked up with the expression of someone who had found the locked door behind the portrait. Aaliyah, she said, did he ever tell you this holding company existed? Aaliyah took the document. Brooks Strategic Advisory. Her maiden name used quietly, privately, almost like a label for a tool Grant had placed in a drawer. The company had received founder-level equity during the first restructuring of Whitmore Capital. Then, after the wedding, administrative control had shifted to Grant's office through paperwork Aaliyah did not remember signing. Her breath slowed. The room sharpened. He had not only taken her ideas, he had preserved her value, hidden it, and hoped she would never look for herself. Aaliyah folded the document once and placed it before Denise. Then let us make sure he remembers who Brooks is. 3 years later, the name Brooks no longer lived in hidden files. It stood in brushed brass letters on the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Madison Avenue, clean, deliberate, impossible to misread. Brooks and Company began with 6 employees, 1 conference table, and a promise Aaliyah wrote by hand before the first investor ever walked through the door. We do not build wealth by erasing the people who create it. At first, the financial world treated her new firm like a graceful side note to a famous divorce, the kind of polite experiment wealthy women were expected to launch after heartbreak. They expected charity. They expected appearances. They expected something soft enough to praise and small enough to ignore. Aaliyah gave them audited returns, disciplined strategy, and a portfolio that grew with the patience of roots under concrete. She invested in women-owned manufacturing companies in Ohio, Black-founded technology startups in Atlanta, immigrant-run food distribution networks in Queens, and community clinics in neighborhoods major banks had described as too risky while quietly profiting from their struggle. Her model was simple and radical because she refused to separate numbers from human consequence. If a company wanted Brooks Capital, it needed clean books, fair wages, transparent leadership, and a plan that did not treat workers like disposable shadows. Some executives laughed in private. Then the first annual report came out. Then the second. By the third, no one was laughing loudly enough to be heard. Brooks and Company outperformed forecasts without sacrificing its principles, and journalists who once called Aaliyah Grant Whitmore's former wife began learning to say founder, chairwoman, strategist, architect. She never corrected them with bitterness. She simply kept building until correction became unnecessary. Her office carried no portrait of Grant, no framed magazine cover from the Whitmore years, no relic of the woman she had been asked to shrink into. Instead, near the windows, she kept Eleanor Brooks's old reading glasses in a small walnut case and a photograph of her mother standing outside the Atlanta Library in a navy dress, smiling as if she already knew her daughter would one day return her name to the sky. On the anniversary of the Belmont Gala, Aaliyah arrived before sunrise wearing a long black coat designed by a young Harlem tailor whose business she had funded during its first fragile year. The coat moved like quiet authority when she crossed the lobby. Her assistant, Maya, now director of operations, met her with a tablet and a smile she was trying not to let become too wide. The Belmont Foundation called again, Maya said. Their lead sponsor withdrew. They want Brooks and Company to take the main position. Aaliyah looked out at Manhattan, where winter light touched the buildings like a verdict. Same hotel? She asked. Same ballroom, Maya answered. Aaliyah closed the folder in her hands. Then let us go back properly. The Belmont Hotel had not changed, but Aaliyah had. The same marble staircase curved beneath the same crystal chandeliers, the same winter arrangements stood in silver urns near the entrance, and the same city shimmered beyond the tall glass walls as if Manhattan had been holding its breath for 3 years. Yet when Aaliyah stepped from the black town car, there was no borrowed name attached to her invitation, no husband walking half a step ahead, no publicist arranging her smile. The cameras turned before anyone announced her, drawn first by the black coat sweeping around her like midnight, then by the calm of her face. Aaliyah Brooks did not enter the Belmont as a memory. She entered as the lead sponsor. Inside the ballroom, conversations softened as people saw the screens above the stage. Not Whitmore Foundation. Not Whitmore Capital. In luminous gold letters, centered above the floral arch, stood Aaliyah Brooks Foundation in partnership with Brooks and Company. The name filled the room with a quiet authority no one could redirect. Women who once looked past her now adjusted their posture. Men who had shaken Grant's hand while ignoring her mind now approached carefully, speaking her name as if it had always belonged among theirs. Aaliyah accepted each greeting with grace, neither warm enough to invite false closeness nor cold enough to reveal old wounds. Power, she had learned, did not need to announce itself. It only needed to remain steady. Across the ballroom, Grant Whitmore stood near the bar in a navy tuxedo, older in ways money could not polish. His hair carried a touch of silver at the temples, and the confidence that once entered rooms before him now seemed to arrive late. Whitmore Capital had survived but not untouched. Several major clients had followed the kind of ethical investment model Aaliyah made impossible to dismiss, and his company had spent 2 years explaining why its most celebrated strategies had roots no one could fully document without mentioning her. When Grant saw her, the glass in his hand lowered. By an inch. It was a small movement, but Aaliyah noticed. She had once built a life on noticing what he tried to hide. Celeste arrived moments later, dressed in pale satin, her smile still practiced, her beauty still sharp, but the room no longer bent around her. She looked from the screen to Aaliyah, then to Grant, and something brittle passed through her expression. Aaliyah did not move toward either of them. She moved toward the stage. The orchestra faded. The lights narrowed gently. Hundreds of faces turned upward. For the first time in that ballroom, no one introduced her as someone's wife. They introduced her by the name she had walked through snow to reclaim. Celeste chose the white coat because she believed memory could still be used as a weapon. She entered the ballroom halfway through Aaliyah's opening remarks, late enough to be noticed, slow enough to be intentional, the old cashmere draped across her shoulders like a challenge she did not fully understand. A faint ripple moved through the guests. Some recognized it. Some only sensed the temperature shift, the way history can step into a room without raising its voice. Grant saw the coat first. His face changed before he could control it. Not anger. Not pride. Something closer to shame, the kind that arrives years after the damage, carrying every detail a person once refused to understand. Aaliyah saw it too. From the stage, beneath the warm white lights, she looked at the coat that had once held her mother's hands, her first courage, her last night as a woman begging to be respected inside someone else's empire. For a moment, the ballroom seemed to fold back into the past. The same chandeliers. The same winter flowers. The same woman trying to wear what had never belonged to her. But Aaliyah was not standing below the staircase anymore. She was standing above it, with her name behind her and a room waiting for her voice. She allowed the silence to settle. Then she smiled, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with the calm of someone who had already survived the worst version of that moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "tonight was created for women whose labor was hidden, whose names were softened, whose dreams were folded into someone else's legacy. I know what it means to lose something precious in a room full of people who pretend not to see. I also know what it means to stop asking that room for permission to heal." Celeste's fingers tightened slightly at the collar. Grant lowered his eyes. Aaliyah turned one page on the glass podium. "Our final auction item tonight was not originally on the list," she continued. "But sometimes the past returns wearing exactly what it took from you. And grace means knowing how to give it a better purpose." A murmur moved through the room, quiet and electric. Aaliyah looked directly at Celeste then. Her voice still gentle enough that no one could call it humiliation and strong enough that everyone understood it was justice. "That coat was my mother's last gift to me. It taught me that love should never be used to make a woman feel small. Tonight, with Miss Marlowe's cooperation, I would like to place it in the charity auction to fund emergency housing, legal support, and business grants for women rebuilding their lives after being erased." Celeste stood frozen beneath the chandelier light, every practiced expression failing her at once. She could refuse and reveal the smallness of the gesture, or surrender the coat and become part of the lesson she had tried to mock. Slowly, with the entire room watching, she removed it from her shoulders and handed it to an attendant. Aaliyah inclined her head. "Thank you," she said. And somehow those 2 words felt larger than revenge. The auction did not feel like punishment. Felt like release. The white cashmere coat rested beneath a glass display case at the center of the ballroom, no longer draped around borrowed pride, no longer trapped in the scene that had once broken Aaliyah open. Under the lights, it looked almost weightless, as if Eleanor Brooks herself had been allowed to breathe again. Bidding began quietly, then rose with a force no one expected. A retired judge offered $50,000. A technology founder doubled it. A woman from Detroit, whose manufacturing company Brooks & Company had funded during its first year, stood with tears shining in her eyes and pledged. Another $100,000 in honor of every woman who had been told to be grateful for being unseen. By the time the auction closed, the coat had raised enough to fund a full year of emergency housing and legal support through the foundation. Aaliyah watched the final number appear on the screen, and for the first time that night, her composure softened into something almost like wonder. The past had not disappeared. It had changed jobs. It no longer existed to wound her. It existed to shelter someone else. After the applause faded, Grant found her near the terrace doors, where Snow moved gently beyond the glass. For a moment, he looked like the man from the diner years ago, the man who had kneaded her mind before he learned to resent her strength. "Aaliyah," he said, and there was no command in her name anymore. Only regret. "I did not understand what I took from you." She looked at him with quiet mercy, but mercy was not the same as return. "No, Grant," she said. "You understood enough to take it carefully. That is why I had to leave carefully too." His eyes lowered. "I am sorry." She accepted the apology with a small nod, not because it repaired the damage, but because she no longer needed the damage to explain who she was. "I hope you become someone who does not need a woman to disappear before you recognize her value," she said. Then she stepped past him, leaving him with the snow and the truth. Outside the Belmont, a black car waited, but Aaliyah paused at the curb. Across the street, the newly renovated building glowed with warm interior light, its bronze sign visible through the snowfall. The Brooks Center for Women's Independence. Tomorrow its doors would open to entrepreneurs, mothers, students, widows, workers, dreamers, women who had lost homes, names, credit, confidence, or time, and needed more than pity. They needed structure. They needed capital. They needed someone to believe rebuilding was not a miracle but a right. Aaliyah crossed the street in her black coat, each step calm against the winter pavement. At the entrance, she touched the letters of her name, not as a symbol of victory over Grant, not as proof that Celeste had lost, but as a promise kept to the girl from Atlanta and the mother who taught her to stand. The city moved around her, bright and unfinished. Aaliyah Brooks smiled into the falling snow and opened the door.